Our speakers are setting up, and so I have a few introductory things, so while they're setting up, I'll do that. So, welcome. My name is Barbara Cooper, and I am the chair of the Fidalgo Democrats. Thank you all for coming. This is a lovely turnout. Really appreciate it. We start the meeting with an acknowledgement. We, the Fidalgo Democrats, acknowledge that we gather on indigenous land, the traditional territory of the Coast Salish people, specifically the Samish and Swinomish people, and pay our respects to elders past, present, and future. If you are not on a mailing list, in the back there we have a sign-up sheet. Please put down your name and email and phone so you won't get just tons and tons of stuff. You'll notified about upcoming meetings and maybe a few important events. If you're going to sign up, please write so we can read it. Said by the person with the worst handwriting in the world, but nonetheless. The other thing I'm going to ask everybody to do is to turn off your cell phones, and I'm going to do mine. All right. Just to let you know, the library doors are locked. The only doors that are open are there and there. And if you need to go to the bathrooms, just go out this door and go around, and those doors are still open. There's cookies in the back. Thank you, Rita Sullivan. Yay for Rita. And we have some coffee, decaf, and some different kind of teas with hot water. The Fidalgo Democrats are an independent democratic association with a focus on education. I'd like to remind everyone we are not a PAC. We cannot endorse candidates or contribute to their campaigns. We do invite Democratic candidates to talk about issues and legislation. If you want to contribute to candidates, we encourage you to go to their websites. Just to let you know, we don't charge dues, but we will pass the hat at some point. And thank you for your contribution. We volunteer at the Brick Dinner at the Presbyterian Church throughout the year. And we have recently donated to the Southern Poverty Law Center and the World Central Kitchen in support of these organizations. So when we have a little bit of extra money, we decide, we being the steering committee, which groups to go. And those were two we felt would be very wonderful groups that do good work. Okay, the reading is being recorded by Isabella, and she has done this before, so we know that we're going to have a good success with that. I do like to remind people the camera's right in the middle there, so if you walk in front of the camera, you're going to be recorded. We do send out an email about the recordings, so if you want to get the YouTube, you can get that on the when we send out the email, that you can click on that. And so if you know somebody or you want to listen to the meeting again, if you missed something, you'll get a YouTube in a few days. Oh, and look who is here. We have Caleb Spouse. I hope I'm probably pronouncing your name wrong. He is the wonderful reporter from the Anacortes American. And if you don't get the Anacortes American, you should. It's really excellent articles by him. He's a really good writer.
What's the name again?
Caleb Spouse. S-P-R-O-U-S-E. And so he is wonderful. Our next meeting, which is Tuesday, April 9th, we have invited the legislators, Senator Liz Lovelit from the 40th, and Representatives Dave Paul and Clyde Chavers from the 10th, and Representatives Deborah Lakanoff and Alex Remmel from the 40th. We haven't gotten 100% sure that they can attend, but we will send out flyers letting you know who exactly is able to make it. And so, before I introduce the speakers, I'd like to ask if there are any elected officials besides the two we have sitting here. We kind of know they're here. Is there anybody else? Okay. Any Democratic Party officials, including PCOs? Sarah, Rita, Ralit, Wim, Andrea. Okay, thank you all for coming, and thanks for all the work that you do. I want to also just do some thank yous for Don Ambrose, who edits the Skagit Democrats newsletter. If you don't get that, please go online and get it. It's excellent. He really has a ton of information in there about what's going on. Carol and Wright Tamler edit the Whidbey Island newsletter, and Doreen Sadler does our Facebook. There's also an ongoing rally Sunday afternoon from 12 to 1 on the corner of 12th and Commercial. There's one new thing that that Valita mentioned, and I think I'm going to mention it as well. It's really something, this coming Thursday, March 14th, it's going to be over at the Lincoln Theater in Mount Vernon. And it's called Read, Think, and Speak Freely. It's a read-on night at the theater. They're going to show the classic movie Fahrenheit 451 at 8 o'clock, but the doors open at 5:30, and there'll be a lot of speakers there from the library, from the school board. There'll be a drag queen story time, the Alliance for Equality, and some students reading poetry and banned books. So if you would like to do that, we have a couple of flyers around. Please let me know and you can see the flyer. All right, I think I've talked enough, and everybody looks like they're settled, so thank you all for coming. We have John Coleman, who is our Anacortes Director of Planning, Community, and Economic Development, and the two City Council members, Christine Cleland McGrath and Ryan Walters. They are on the City Council planning committees, as well as several other council committees. They're also very active members of the Anacortes community. And I'm going to let them introduce themselves and talk about themselves. So I'm going to pass the good mic on to them. Here you go. Start with John.
All right, so thank you. I'm John Coleman. As I was introduced, I'm the Director of the Planning, Community, and Economic Development Department. I'm going to tell everybody very briefly what that means when I get started here. And I've been with the city for 10 months now, so I might be a new face to all of you, so I'm glad to be out here meeting all of you and spreading a good word about our 2025 comp plan update process, which is the topic of tonight's presentation. So I'll pass it off now. Did you want them to speak about themselves now? What we plan to do today is I'm going to give a presentation about our comp plan update process and more importantly how you can be involved in it. And then there'll be, I'm not sure, are we going to do some presentation from the council members and then question and answer or something. We're gonna kind of shoot from the hip there a little bit. I'm gonna try to get through this without too many questions, unless there's something that's really confusing to you. Let's try to just get through this because there will be a question and answer period, and I want to leave enough time for our electeds to have their chance to speak with you as well.
I'll let them introduce themselves. I'll let you guys use the good mic.
Okay. Hello everyone, I'm Christine Cleland McGrath. Thank you for having us here and being willing to... All right, I'm Christine Cleland McGrath. Thank you all for having us here tonight. I just was reelected to my second term. We've got 3 wards, Ward 1, 2, and 3. I'm Ward 2, and then we have 4 council members that are at large, so a total of 7 council members. So I'm kind of the south end of town, and then out Sharp's Corner and out Highway 20. So that's kind of my area, although I think we all care about all parts of our community. Before I was on city council, I was on Planning Commission for about 4 years, so I actually was able to be a Planning Commission member through the 2016 Comprehensive Plan, and then voted on the development regulations in December of 2019, and then got to review them as a council member in 2020. So it's time again to start this work. We're enjoying it. I have been in real estate in the past. It's kind of stepping back at this point in time because I have a almost 3-year-old at San Juan Montessori, which is right over just a block away. And then I also have my daughter Cora, who is a kindergartner at Fidalgo School. The same school I went to, my mom went to, and my grandmother went to. So I'm very excited to have her there, and it's really neat to kind of see that full circle. So beyond city council, I started to kind of get involved with the community in my late 20s as an arts festival board member, was president for a number of years and went kind of through all that process. Currently serve as Anacortes Family Center board member, so if you've got questions about that, I'm always happy to talk about it. It's an amazing portion of our community and does a lot of good work. And serve on a number of committees: planning, HACS, which is Housing Affordability and Community Services, personnel, finance, what else? Public safety. There's a number. So if you've got other questions, I know we're all here to answer. So thank you for having us.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Ryan Walters. I also was just reelected to my seat, the Ward 1 seat. We were here in this room last week, 2 weeks ago, with Councilmember Bruce McDougall and Councilmember TJ Fantini, also talking about the comprehensive plan, also talking about any other number of issues. We do that fairly regularly. So if you've got questions outside the scope of the presentation tonight, there will be other opportunities, and my card is on the table back there as well. I am a former prosecuting attorney, former planning director, and I'm currently in private practice working for municipalities, writing the code for the city of Stanwood and working for the Department of Commerce in Skagit County. That's what I do in my day job now, which frees me up to help you a lot in my work with the city of Anacortes. I'm on the planning committee. I'm on the Housing Affordability and Community Services committee. I'm also on the IT committee and the fiber committee. And this is harder than I thought. Yeah, I'm chairman this year of the Lodging Tax Advisory Committee. And if you're interested in that, you know, we have an event center proposal that we can talk about outside of this meeting, but my card's on the back table. And I used to be on the finance committee, but not anymore, so I've passed that baton. And that might be it. Am I on any other? Oh, the Port City Liaison Committee that Christine is also on. So we tend to share a lot of committees, but we just happen to be on a lot of committees too. Means that we understand quite the breadth of what the city is working on, but we also have quite a bit of background in planning and the subject matter tonight. So we're excited about this, and we're excited about John's presentation, and then getting to all of your questions. So thank you. This is the good one.
This is good. Go forward.
All right.
That's a good one. That's a good one.
It was muted.
That was me.
All right, thank you, everybody. Again, what I'm going to be talking to you tonight is about our 2025 comprehensive update cycle. I don't expect any of you to know what that is right now. I'm going to, like I said, I'm going to kind of drive through and explain that all to you. What we're not going to be talking about is projects going on in the city. Those, anytime you've got questions about like specific projects, especially the larger ones, there's usually a website for the larger projects and with all the materials there, and you can always just contact staff with that. It's especially tough tonight to talk about any project related things because we have council members in the room, and council members tend to have to vote on large projects, so it's not good to have council members around when discussing projects like that. In other words, we just really don't. I want to talk about this, and I'm making up excuses for why I can't tell you about JD tonight. Okay, so what does the planning department do? The Planning Community and Economic Development Committee, Planning Committee, I'm so used to that. The Planning Community and Economic Development Department has many legs to it. First, of course, planning, which is our comprehensive plans, and I'm going to explain what a comprehensive plan is. That's our development regulations, such as our zoning and our other development regulations that help guide development in the city. So if somebody submits a land use application, such as a long plat, a short plat, or a building permit, these are the development regulations that tell the staff administratively how to process these. And we tend to have very high level of detail in those to make it easier to enact the community's will through staff. And so that's the development regulations, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. We also have other guidelines such as development regulations, and zoning is part of our development regulations also. We're going to be talking about the highlighted one tonight, the part of the planning department that reviews our long-range comprehensive planning. It's a little bit more about what we do. I mentioned, like, if you wanted to come in and get a permit, so whether it be a building permit or land use permit, a variance or something like that for development on your property, that's our Frontline Customer Service Permitting Center. That's on the 3rd floor of City Hall. You've probably all been there. If not, it's really fun. You should come by. We have some really nice people working for us. You'll leave being glad that you met them. We also coordinate economic development activities. We work with the chamber and the port and other local businesses. We're not going to be talking about much about that tonight, or at all. And then, as the council members tonight, we're talking about staff supports those council committees, the many council committees that we have. I staff the Lodging Tax Advisory Committee. I attend the Port City Liaison meeting. I also staff the Planning Committee, of course. It kind of makes sense. It's I'm the planning director. And the Housing and Community Services and the Economic Development Committee. So I may have you beat. I'm not sure. It's close. It's not a competition, though. We also administer the Community Development Block Grant, which is federal money that we receive specifically for affordable housing and supported housing. We're not going to be talking much about that, although it is an important part of what we do. Unfortunately, we only receive about $105,000 a year. So we have to find other ways to find money for affordable housing. That's the 1/10 of 1% tax that that you all voted for and was approved for affordable housing measures. So we're also involved in all that. I feel like this is getting quieter. So the big thing we're going to be talking about tonight is we prepare, administer, and implement land use plans, policies, codes that guide and regulate physical development in the city. So, like I said, with our development regulations, those are the codes that everybody has to follow when they apply for a building permit to make sure it looks nice and has proper setbacks and has the appearance and use that is what the community has told us they want the city to look like. So we are the keepers of that document, and then you go to our Frontline Customer Service Center and make sure that those are followed. So all of those development and regulations come out of our comprehensive plan. I don't know if you've ever heard of the Growth Management Act. Hopefully you have. It was passed in 1990 and subsequently modified several times and constantly updated at the state level. At its core, it requires comprehensive plans for every jurisdiction that is regulated under the GMA. So everything west of the mountains, we'll just say, is absolutely regulated under the Growth Management Act. So every city and county is on this side of the mountains is required to have a comprehensive plan. We're also required to have urban growth area boundaries, which are areas outside of the city into which we plan to grow, and only into those areas can we annex. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. And then we're also required to have a critical areas ordinance, which is in place to make sure that our critical areas such as wetlands, steep slopes, riparian management zones, we call them here, but basically stream corridors, shorelines are all protected during the development process. The comprehensive plan itself, now we get to kind of the boring stuff, I'm sorry. The plan has several elements, including a land use element, housing, economic development, environment and conservation, parks and rec, transportation, capital facilities, and utilities. Those are all what's in our comprehensive plan right now. The land use one is the really big one that we focus on because that tells us how we plan to use the land. So that tells us sort of our guidelines that we use for our zoning. It tells us, what types of housing or commercial uses are allowed where, and under sort of broader terms, how we want to see that development. So the comprehensive plan is largely our goals and policies for how we want to see growth in the future. And then from that comprehensive plan, we filter down to those lower levels of development regulations, which are more specific and actually have more teeth to it, like you thou shalt do this, instead of the comprehensive plan is we certainly hope to do this. And then over there on the right, you see this new element in 2025. The state legislature passed new requirements to have a climate and resiliency element in our comprehensive plan. That's going to be a lot of new information and details that we need to put in our comprehensive plan. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more today too. So why am I telling you about this now? Because we're doing the full court press right now to let everybody know that we are in our periodic update cycle. So we're just kicking this off right now. We are required by the Growth Management Act to update our comprehensive plan every so many years. It changes all the time. Right now it's every 10 years we need to update our comprehensive plan. And so our next comprehensive plan update is due at the end of 2025. So we're starting that process now. We've done a little bit of background work with the regional our regional partners, and now we're starting at the city level. I mentioned our comp plan needs to comply with the development regulations, and it also needs to comply with the county-wide planning policies and the county comp plan. And when we're talking about urban growth areas, we do the legwork to determine how big our urban growth area should be, but ultimately we have to convince the county of that, and the county is the one that officially designates it. I'll get into a little bit more detail as we go along. As I mentioned, we're working with our regional partners, which is all of the cities and the county, to figure out how we are going to grow. So it's a county-wide cooperative process. We're going to update our UGAs, or maybe not update our UGAs. It's going to be based on county population and employment projections, which I have information about that here, and that is where this all gets started. So it starts with the State Office of Financial Management provides us population projections for each county. So then the counties then have to figure out how we're going to divvy that up amongst the various jurisdictions. And I'll talk about that briefly here coming up. And so what we're going to do, we've already done that, and I'll explain the details of that in a minute. Now it's come down to the city level, and we have to, after being given the allotment of population and employment projections, so how many people are going to live here in 2045 is what we're trying to figure out. And once we do, then we have to figure out how we're going to accommodate those people. That means making plans for transportation, for housing, for our land use, for capital facilities. And so that's a whole lot to do. And you're going to be involved in this process, hopefully giving feedback as we go along. We start with our, before we try to figure out how we're going to accommodate everybody, we do a land capacity analysis, and we're actually in the process of doing that right now. That we've hired a consultant to do a parcel by parcel analysis of every single parcel in the city to determine, is it already built upon? Is it vacant? Or is it somewhere in between? And try to figure out how much capacity we have for growth in the city by determining how much land we have, and then looking at its current zoning and say, okay, if it's a vacant lot and it's 1 acre, and if it's in the R2 zone, you can get 4 units on it. Make some assumptions like that. And then it'll give us our baseline. How much land do we have for development? Are we going to be able to accommodate our future population growth? That's the easy part. We also have to update, then if we need to expand our growth area to accommodate that future growth in housing and businesses, then we have to expand the UGA through the county process, and that is not the easy part. So we're doing an inventory of existing capacities and and we're planning upgrades necessary to accommodate the growth, as I mentioned. We're going to be also required to do an update to our critical areas ordinance, which I already mentioned, and changes to the development regulations to enact all this. As I mentioned, our land use regulations need to be consistent with our comprehensive plan, which is the zoning codes in Title AMC 19. I have a link on here, so I will be providing this to you, to the Fidalgo Dems if they want. So you should be able to click on this link. That's just our municipal codes, our zoning section that tells you in each of our zones what's allowed and under what rules, which is, specific standards for new construction and land subdivisions. This is our current zoning map. We've conveniently made green parks. I think that is the easy part. And traditionally in zoning maps, yellow means lower intensity zoning. So I'll come over here. I didn't bring my laser pointer, so I'll stand in some people's way and hopefully others will understand. So this is our lower density zoning. This is our lowest R1 density zoning. This is our R2A zoning, which is also slightly less, or slightly more density than the R2. And then our R3 zone is the next level up in density. And then Old Town, which right up there, we're just outside Old Town here, or no, we're actually in Old Town right now, right? So we're in Old Town right now. That's the next highest level of residential density. And then R4, which is on either side of our commercial district, that's our highest intensity, meaning the most units allowed per acre. And then Sharp's Corner's down here, so you can't tell real well, but here's Highway 20 and Highway 20 spur, so there's Sharp's Corner, and we have some R4 down there that the city owns. Otherwise, you're seeing commercial, you're seeing industrial, light manufacturing, commercial marine, more commercial marine. Along the waterfront is a lot of commercial and marine oriented land, which kind of makes sense because we're a maritime community and we need to make a lot of that land available for people doing maritime related business. And that's been the historic land use, and that's what we've been including.
I'd like to point out as well that March's Point is not in the city.
So, correct. So March's Point itself, the refineries are not in city limits. They are in our urban growth area.
Was it always like that?
Well, I think they were built in the 50s, so it was like that before our 1990 comprehensive plan and urban growth area boundaries. So that it's never been in city limits, and who knows if it ever will be, but they are in an urban growth area, so if they ever wanted to come in, we could go through a process to determine if they were to come in. But so far, it hasn't seemed very likely that they're interested, which is fine. Okay, so during our 2025 periodic update, we're required to look at our population projections, our employment projections, our available housing options for new residents, and this year we have a new requirement that we have to figure out how to accommodate each housing unit types in different income bands. And I have some slides on that I'll explain a little, make more sense when you see that. And then these are just listing some of those mandatory elements that we're updating, our urban growth area and critical areas. Sorry, that's a little repetitive. So like I said, we're starting with our population projections. What I don't have here is the first layer, which was the county population projections that we all started from. The county, Skagit County Council of a lot more jobs, over 3,000 more jobs than we currently have, 33% increase. So at the city, we tend to value jobs because it makes it possible for people to actually live here and not have to commute across the bridges to find housing. You've probably heard that there is a housing crisis in Skagit County in Western Washington, and Anacortes is not immune to that. We are definitely short on housing here, and I'll get into that a little bit more here in a second. So when I say we're going to see 27% more residents over 20 years, I wanted to put that in perspective because from 1970 to 80, we saw 17, when they broke this down by 10 years because the census data is every 10 years on the even year. So from 70 to 80 was a 17% growth, and then 80 to 90 and 90 to 2000 were 27% growth each of those periods. So that's pretty amazing. From 2000 to 2010 was only 8%. So that was a little bit of a lull, and that's not actually consistent with the rest of Skagit County. Skagit County between 20 and 2010 saw a lot of population growth, not quite as much as the 90 to 2000, but it was a little bit down here in Anacortes. And then in 2010 to 2020, we've been clipping along at about 12% increase. So when I break down our 20-year population projection into 10-year increments, what we're seeing is, we're making, if they're 4,988 divided by 20 gives us 217 new residents per year. Extrapolate that out to be 10 years, and that's roughly 2,168 persons, new persons every 10 years. That's a 12% increase. And then when you see 2032 to 2042 with that same growth, the number actually goes down, and that's because of math. Statistically, because you're starting with a higher number, divide it into a smaller number, or dividing a smaller number, the same number to a larger figure gives you a lower growth percentage rate. I'm not qualified to really explain that, but I did my best. So what that means now is we look at our housing. So population growth that number of new residents requires 2,942 units, and that's based on our demographics of how many persons per house. And this was the number that the Department of Commerce, they have a tool that spits these numbers out when you put in the number of housing units, the number of residents that you're going to grow by. It spits out all these numbers, including 2,942 new units. Like I mentioned, we get to do something fun and interesting this year. Is instead of just saying, okay, we need to accommodate 2,942 units, we're gonna just make sure we've got enough enough land to do single-family houses for 2,942 units. Now we have to be much more sophisticated about it and say, we need to accommodate housing for everybody in the actual income bands that people in the area need. So what you see down at the bottom here is the area median income bands. So 0 to 30, you can see there's 6 bands here: 0 to 30, 31 to 50, 51 to 80, 81 to 100%, 101 to 120%, and then over 120% AMI. 0 to 30 is people who are making less than 30% of the area median income, which is $96,200 for more or less a 2-earner home. So 96,000 isn't all that much. So when you're 0 to 30% AMI, that's less than minimum wage, especially 0. That's 0% minimum. So when we look at the income bands of 0 to 30 and 30 to 51, that's going to be largely supported housing. So some think Anacortes Family Center has supported housing, and the Anacortes Housing Authority, of course, that is their business. They provide housing that's affordable to people in these lower income bands. Now, these numbers are pretty staggering. You can see there's a deficit already of number of these lower income band housing unit types, and that's why people that don't earn a lot of money are traveling to other places in the county for housing. Now, it's probably not much of a surprise to people that in Anacortes housing prices are high, and probably a little higher, I don't have the statistics, but a little higher than the other cities in the rest of the county. Now, when we look at these numbers, what that means is we can't just accommodate housing assuming single-family houses. We need to provide housing that is easier to afford, so that means all types of housing. These lower income bands are going to be, you think of the new Anacortes Family Center, 23-unit housing built off of Commercial Ave, is multi-family, many units in one building. That's how we're going to mostly accommodate these lower bands. And the Department of Commerce has guidance for what each of these means, and it's roughly multifamily for these lower 3 bands, triplexes, duplexes, smaller apartments, kind of in the 51 to 100%, and then like the 80 to 100 would be your duplexes, triplexes, maybe cottages. That's a type of housing that we allow in the city here. Is smaller houses clustered together on a lot. So instead of having 2 single-family homes on an area, you can get like 4 to 6 cottage housing if they're smaller, and they have to be less than 1,200 square feet. And there's other limitations to make sure that they're small with the idea of keeping them affordable. And then anything over 120% AMI, that can be counted, the only single family housing can count in the 120. I mean, you can count other units in the 120, I guess I said that backwards, but if you build a single family home, you can't build a single family home for a little enough money to qualify for any of the other units. So if you build a single family home, it's going to be in the 120% and over area. So that really changes how we have to look at accommodating housing in Anacortes and in the state, because these are statewide rules. Fortunately, we've already, back in 2016, changed our comp plan to address this issue of wanting to provide more different types of homes in order to provide more affordable homes. So in our 2016 comp plan, that's when we came up with the idea of allowing more townhouses and cottages and duplexes, and making it easier to build these what's called middle housing throughout the city. and putting less focus on single-family housing. And then in 2019, we passed the development regulations to allow us to do so. You can see in 2019, we had 72% of the single-family residences, 72% of the new units were single-family. After we've passed those of these new development regulations, you can see how the pie chart is changing to disperse the types of housing units that are now being developed. So this tells us that the development community and the housing industry was interested in something besides single-family homes. And our rules, perhaps, were holding them back. Because as soon as we change the rules, now we're seeing a different type of housing pattern being developed. And that's a good thing, because that's what we're going to need to do to...
What's the green?
The green?
Yeah, what are the green pie pieces?
That's the multifamily. And I know I got to blast through this because there's going to be a bunch of questions, and I know the council members want to speak. So we're planning to continue to encourage different types of housing, whether it be multifamily or cottages, triplexes, in order to meet our requirement to address housing in all income bands. That's a big change, and we had started that conversation in 2016, and we're going to continue that conversation. So we're going to be with this process. We're going to be examining how we can accommodate all these new units and unit types. We already did. We'll be doing that parcel by parcel analysis. Did I review this one? And then the number of units in each lot will be determined. And if you can't fit it all in the city, we're going to need to either expand our urban growth area to accommodate more housing, or we need to change our zoning regulations to allow more density. So that would mean allowing more units on the current lots that we have. And that's a big policy decision that we expect the community to weigh in on, and we're trying to, that's why we're here today, is to explain the situation and why we would even contemplate something like that. And the answer is right there. How are we going to accommodate these kinds of, all of these housing numbers? It's a challenging policy question, and that's why the city council members are here to back me up.
Well, what are all these people going to be doing when they come to town? I mean, they're going to have jobs, or are they going to be retired, or what?
So it'll be a mix, but we're also expecting our growth in jobs as well. So you saw 33% increase in new jobs in the city, so that would be providing jobs for the new people that are coming to town. If you have questions about some of the details or anything that I've been talking about, I gave some more detailed information at both the February 28th Planning Commission meeting, so you can go to the city website and go to that meeting and look at my half-hour presentation to the Planning Commission. And I also spoke for, I don't know, a half hour or more at the February 26th council meeting. That one actually focuses a little bit more on actual development that is going on in the city, and more of a state of the state of development in the community right now. Now, as promised, I was going to talk about our climate change and resiliency element, another required element of the comp plan. Now, we recognize that climate change is a bit of a lightning rod issue. Not everybody's going to see eye to eye on climate change or what we should do about it, or even if we should do anything about it. But we are required to study climate change. We are required to have a greenhouse gas emissions sub-element. And so we're already working to hire a consultant to do a greenhouse gas emissions inventory, so to determine how much greenhouse gas the city is producing now, and then we'll be looking at policies. Later, after we get this data, we'll be looking at policies for how to address and reduce that. We also have to reduce vehicle miles traveled. So we're doing a transportation plan. We'll look at vehicle miles traveled. And that's ultimately a regional issue. So that's going to be addressed largely and additionally at the county level with the vehicle miles traveled. We're also going to be doing a resiliency sub-element. So as we see more frequent floods, as we see hotter days, as we see windier, stormier weather, as we see sea level rise and all of the effects of global climate change, how are we going to be prepared to protect our infrastructure and our citizens from those effects? So that will be our resiliency sub-element. We're going to be presenting the kickoff of this in a couple of months. We're trying to get the word out that we're going to be doing this because we don't want staff to be just making these policies up. We really want it to be honestly, like, I don't want to make it up. I want to hear from you, and our consultants will help us synthesize all the comments we get from the community and help create policies on both of these issues. We're on March 27th, we're going to be having a planning commission meeting, and I'm going to be presenting our public participation plan for our 2025 comprehensive plan update. So that's going to outline very generally, it's not going to be like a date by date plan, but it's going to say, these are the benchmarks we're trying to achieve. These are the places where we envision public comment, and laying it out for the public to understand how this process is going to work and how you can participate. Because really, participation is a big part of this, and it's more fun to have people in the room than, this is great, this is more people than we see at a typical planning commission meeting, so it'd be great to see people showing up for these. But we will, of course, have continuous, robust public input throughout the 2025 comprehensive plan update, because that's what we do. It is your plan, it is your comprehensive plan, it is your development regulations that guide how the community is going to look, how we're going to address these important issues, how we're going to grow. And before I get to the end, I want to do one last plug about why we plan. So that's always the first question I get when I give a presentation like this is, why do we have to accommodate all these numbers? And it's a fair question. Like, maybe we don't, like, we don't want all of that growth. So can we just say no? Well, the right to travel portion of the U.S. Constitution says no, we can't just turn off growth and say people can't come into the town. We can't create regulations that say only so many people are allowed every year. That's been taken to the courts and not allowed. Secondly, so since we can't just say no to growth, we need to plan for growth. Traffic is one of the ills of unplanned growth. That's the one thing that I can point to pretty exclusively, because everybody hates traffic. And it's done, we largely have traffic because we didn't plan for it coming properly. We didn't necessarily think, okay, we're gonna have these many people, and where are they gonna live? Where are they gonna work? So we try to do a better job of that these days and make sure that we're planning to make sure that our roads and our infrastructure, are we gonna have enough water? Is our sewer plant, or is our sewer system that pipes throughout the city sized appropriately to accommodate all of this? So instead of saying no to growth, the best way forward is for us to just plan for growth. And Anacortes is beautiful. Of course everybody wants to move here. Try to stop them. And with that, I'm done. Do you want to do question and answer first, or do you want to do your?
Let's jump in.
Okay, sure.
Do you want us to like turn this off so you can walk around with us?
No, that's okay. Well, thank you, John, for that thorough presentation. When I think about kind of the takeaways, right, is that in 1990 we had the what's it called? Oh my gosh, like Growth Management Act, right? And so that was a big change for our community. Personally, my family has quite a bit of acreage. We had 300-400 acres during that time. We had the golf course, we had tidelands, we had a lot of property. We're down to about 150 acres, but that had a large effect on us. And so when we talk about regulation, when we talk about development, there is a real impact, right? And so we've got the Growth Management Act to address, and I would love to have, if you can, pull up the zoning map, because I feel like that is really valuable when we're talking about the community and our two options. One is we annex more property in, right, and we continue to allow single family construction, or we could go the density route. And to me, when we look at this, we've got water to the north, we've got our parks, which are green, right? We've got all of this, and this is incredibly important. It's 3,000 acres of our community forest lands among here and Washington Park. And there's not really a clear path for adding land in, right? When we talk about adding land in, it means we've got to have sewer, we have to have water, we have to have electricity, we have to have emergency services. And it also kind of ruins the nature and open space that we've all come to value. So that means we've got to be really smart when we look at increasing density. And so the next step is, after we talk about the urban growth area and this area, is that how do we accommodate that additional growth? And the comprehensive plan is our opportunity to really state our values as a community, our goals as a community, what we want to see for the folks who are sitting in this room, for the folks that want to live here, that do live here, that are like my children, I would like to see have a place in their 20s, early 20s and 30s to live, which I don't know about, I think Ryan had a similar experience. Our generation, I graduated in 2003, a number of my friends could not afford to live here. So they went to other areas of the county or other areas of Washington State, and their goal was to come back. The majority of them didn't come back. And that is a real kind of suck about our community and our talent pool and our expertise. And so we've got to think about how we accommodate not just folks who live here, but the folks that are graduating from our schools, and make sure that that talent and that passion for our community, right, and that stewardship continues, because we're both folks who benefited from all of you taking care of us, the forest lands and whatnot. The other component is, as people age, the kind of unseen thing we continue to be made aware of is the families who have kids who graduate, and then there's two people in a single family home with 2, 3, 4 bedrooms, and then maybe a spouse dies or a partner dies, right? And now there's one person in this 3 or 4 bedroom home, and they stay there not because necessarily they want to, because it's a lot of times isolating. They stay there because there's no other housing option available in our community. We've seen the majority of housing be single family. After our 2016 comprehensive plan, we saw a number of housing options be introduced to the market, which is cottage housing, which are typically 1,200 square feet. And John's commented or spoke a little bit on that. And the concept that I remember, because Andrea and Jeff were both on planning commission with me during that time, and a number of you, I'm going to warn you, John, that the majority of these people have been in our planning commission room and council chambers and are well versed in commenting, and we appreciate that, and no doubt they'll be back. But that we have to have this, the cottage housing was a concept that came out of our discussions where a typical house is 2,400 square feet, right? And that's a 7,000 square foot lot. The idea with cottage housing is that it's limited to 1,200 square feet per unit. So the idea is that you put 2 houses, each 1,200 square feet, and that square footage is comparable to a traditional single family home. Right or wrong, it gives you one more option in the toolbox of types of housing to live in. The other thing we saw was duplexes and triplexes and fourplexes. Most recently, we did a housing action plan, which was a study of kind of what our comprehensive plan and development regulations, what worked, what didn't work, how we can improve them. And one of the things that came out was the fact that when we put the conditional process on duplexes and triplexes and fourplexes in certain zones, and they're to scale, that it really makes it more challenging for those units to be built. Whether it's the process of going through neighborhood discussions, whether it's the financing to take it from either a 2 to 3 month process to over 6 months. So we're trying to simplify those things down. And I'm kind of rambling on now. Anyway, I really think that this first round, which is the comprehensive plan, is about figuring out what our goals are, figuring out what we want our community to look like, figuring out how we're going to get all of the folks, those important people, whether it's librarians, whether it's doctors, whether it's school teachers, whether it's the folks that are at the grocery store, right, and help us check out every day, that there needs to be options, not only for all of those different professions, but also different ages, and that we can be a whole community that's connected. And I think that's all. I'm sure we have lots more to say, but anyway, thank you.
Thank you. I think Christine really touched on it right at the end there. We want Anacortes to be a whole community. A couple of years ago, there was a candidate for city council who didn't get elected, who asked the question at a debate, what is wrong with Anacortes? Well, we have an identity crisis. We don't know if we want to be a tourism community or a retirement community. I would say precisely the wrong question. We don't want to be any of those things. We want to be a whole community. We want to be a great place for tourists to come. We don't want to be a tourist community. We don't want to be a Leavenworth. We want to be a great place for people to retire, but we don't want to be a retirement community composed entirely of retirees. We want to be a whole community where people retire, people come as tourists, then people leave as tourists. But where there's enough housing for the people who work downtown, where there are enough employees for the jobs that are already available downtown. So Ghirardelli is closed on Mondays, which makes it available for meetings. So Ghirardelli is closed on Mondays. The job is there if employees were available to work that job. And that answers some of the question about where do all these people work. John, if you could put the slide up about the elements of the comprehensive plan. Because we did this really large effort in 2014, 2015, and 2016 to yield the 2016 comprehensive plan. And these are the components, not the blue one because that's new, but these are the components of the comprehensive plan. When we look at this next update, my goal is for us to achieve the whole community vision with our land use regs and our zoning and our planning policies, lay the groundwork so that we have a comprehensive ecosystem for housing and employment and people at all ages and all income levels. I think that of these elements, the ones we really need to focus on are housing, and that should be fairly obvious because we have all these new requirements to plan and because we are in a local, state, regional, and national housing crisis. Climate. Climate is very important to me. I wrote Skagit County's Climate Action Plan back in 2010, when similarly we got a grant to do that kind of work. And Anacortes has a climate action plan today, but no one's seen it in a while. It needs to be updated. And the comprehensive plan is the best place for us to try to accomplish those goals. But also capital facilities. Transportation is similarly important, but capital facilities is incredibly important. And I try to talk to people about this whenever I can. And usually people lose interest quickly. It was a number of years ago that we launched our fiber project. And at the time, former Mayor Gear and I had a conversation about that, and she was concerned a little bit about how expensive it was going to be, and we all were. At that time, we were thinking, we would spend somewhere on the order of $12 million. And it was, in my judgment, worth it because of the service that we were providing and how important fiber is to everything that we do now, and internet connectivity generally, but fiber is a reliable service, and it enables people to work from home, which is an important component going for our employment numbers. But my point is this: she was concerned about $12 million. $12 million is nothing. $12 million is not how you bankrupt a city. How you bankrupt a city is don't pave the roads for several years. Because when I took office, we had a $60 million deferred maintenance budget deficit on pavement management, on maintaining our roads, because we weren't doing that. $60 million. And so that's why we launched an effort to put money into that. But capital facilities are how you bankrupt a city. Don't plan to replace your capital facilities. Don't spend money on maintaining your capital facilities. So that, throughout my entire time in office, has been one of my highest priorities, for us to do a good job on capital facilities planning and actually putting money into maintaining our facilities so we don't lose them, and so we don't have to spend over and above what ordinarily would cost us to replace those capital facilities. On land use, on economic development, on environment and conservation, on parks and rec, I think we've largely hit the mark. We kind of know where our housing is going to go. We know where our industrial land is going to go. We've got a parks element, we've got an environment element, and it'll be supplemented here. So I feel like we're hitting those marks. But on housing, on climate, and on capital facilities, I want us to really focus. And I also want us to keep in mind that it is an ecosystem. If you build too many roads, you get more traffic. If you have not enough houses and add too many jobs, you get more traffic. If you then build a road to handle the traffic, more people feel like, okay, I can go drive on that road. You pull on this lever and it affects that lever. So we have to look at it very much holistically, and we have to figure out how we can balance all of that. All of the land use planning side, kind of the physical environment that we're going to be building, but not lose sight of the fact that what we are building is a community with lower income level, higher income level, jobs to work at Ghirardelli, jobs to work at the hospital, everything in between. We need all of that. We need it in the right proportions, or you do dump traffic on Highway 20, as John was pointing out. And remember, there really is only Highway 20 coming in and out of Anacortes. And you send all those workers who are here during the day, if we can afford them, to some other community at night. And so then they are not invested in the community. They're not part of the community. That's not the community that I want. I want a whole community. And I really think that that's the theme for our comprehensive plan update. How are we achieving a whole community? We're doing it with housing, we're doing it with all these other things, but that's the theme.
Well, this has been quite an interesting discussion. I'm slightly overwhelmed, but let's move along. What I'd like to do now is, besides thanking the three of you for coming, I'm going to open it up to questions. What I'm going to ask people to do is to wait till I give you the microphone and state your name, and if you can, stand up so that we can hear what you have to say and what questions you have. And I'll have you raise your hand and I'll bring the microphone to you. Okay, I see, I'm gonna start with Jeff because his hand went up really quick.
It kind of feels like deja vu, doesn't it? If I remember the math, like 2/3 of the growth is going to be in lower income housing. And just math wise, you don't have enough space in R3 and R4 for that, right? So some of it's going to have to go in R2, a lot of it, which means a lot of multifamily in R2.
I don't think you're gonna see a lot of multifamily in R2. If you look at the zoning map, R2 is, and maybe we can jump back to that. R2 is west of Anacortes.
Right.
So there is a lot of constraint that is outside of the city's control on multifamily development in R2. Skyline, all the other developments have lots of CCRs. I don't think you're gonna see it in R2. Maybe R2A.
You can't add 2,000 units in R3 and R4 the way the city's constructed now. You just can't.
Okay.
There's not space. There's not space, it's obvious.
That's what the land capacity is.
Yeah, so as John mentioned, the first step is the land capacity analysis to determine what can be accomplished under current zoning. And then we also have Sharp's Corner, which is nearly 40 acres down south there. And then of course there's also the possibility of redevelopment. And for example, the Housing Authority is looking at redevelopment of their properties on our avenue. So I don't think we know the number yet.
Okay.
There was a lot of capacity for residential and our commercial.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, for example, yeah, there's also commercial, right? There is capacity for multifamily there also. So, for example, the bowling alley property, right? That's a big vacant lot. Back of the napkin math, I think that property, they're thinking they could put 70 units there. Are those market rate units or what? We don't know. But for an example of a vacant lot, that's 70 units is something that seems to make sense, be reasonable there. The other one is we talk about the Housing Authority. A lot of those units or developments that they have between commercial and R are 1 story and 2 stories. It may be that they have to make a master plan and go up higher 4 or 5 stories to increase the density on those properties, because they were built in a time where the density that they were doing was fine, and now we have to think at a higher density. And those are centrally located for public transit, for walkability, for community services. You look at the family center. I mean, they've got on their campus currently, I'm looking at you, Shay, how many units do we have on there? Do you know?
61.
61, and those kind of fit in where there were some single family homes and some businesses and whatnot. So yeah, we're gonna have to be creative, but that's part of our part of the work we have to do. But we don't have just a lot of raw land available. Yes, Sharp's Corner is something we're going to look at, and there's been money set aside to do a deep dive of what is feasible there. There's a Cascade natural gas line that goes through. There's critical areas that we believe are there. We want to kind of understand better where setbacks would be and what our capacity is really. But that's a project that we want to be very thoughtful, because it's pretty isolated compared to the rest of where our community lives. So that's going to be a project that we look towards in the next year or two, is how do we, if that's somewhere that we can increase units or put units, how do we make that a desirable place? And I think both of our goals, and the planning committee's goal would be that it has a range of income, and that there's an appeal there, so that it's a livable place. But again, we have to do the work to see if that makes sense.
I have a question over here.
Barbara Smart. Okay, right now in Anacortes, we're going to start having 2 groups of people. You're going to have the people who were lucky enough to have a house either a single-family house or a townhouse or a condominium. It will be your property. The rest of these look like they're all going to be rentals. Who is owning these duplexes and the big apartments? I mean, they're all going to be rental people. And I mean, a lot of times they're transitory, but a lot of times people stay in one place. What happens if they still make the $96,000, but the rent goes up to, right now, what is the average rent in Anacortes? $2,000 a month? So that means, how is anybody going to afford to live here? Because no matter what, we will never have enough housing, and the prices will keep going up. So how are you going to resolve all this? Are we going to become one massive 5-story slum? That is what it's going to be anyway.
Okay, well, so I would reject the premise of the question, number one. So first of all, it is certainly true that there has not been very much condominium development in the state of Washington in the last 10 or so years, and that's because of condo liability rules, which the legislature has been working to fix. So I think that going forward, we will see more condominiums than we have in, is it the last 10, 15 years that this has been a problem? So we do have condominiums in town now. There are quite a few that you can point to. None of them, I think, are downtown. And I think one of the best things that we could do for Anacortes is to build a condominium building in our downtown. Get more people downtown, more customers for our shops, more employees for our shops, get more activity downtown, enliven downtown further. That's part of our plan as well. I mean, development regulations would allow for condominium buildings in our downtown. Put one right next to the Majestic, it would fit right in. It is actually the historical height that Anacortes used to be built at. But let's back up a second. The rental people are already here in Anacortes during the day. They leave at 5 o'clock. They head out of town to go live in Cedar Woolley or Concrete or further, and they put that traffic on Highway 20. But the rental people are doing a lot of the jobs here in Anacortes. There's fundamentally nothing wrong with people who rent. And for some set of calculations, it's actually more efficient to rent than own. But I think I fundamentally reject the premise that, I mean, I understand the concern, and I also understand that people's investment in their houses is almost, for all of us, our largest investments. Certainly is mine. But we also need housing for people in our community who are part of our community, just only during the day. And so that does mean building more housing of different sizes, types, and styles. And I ran for city council on that platform in 2011, because this was a problem in 2011. And it has only gotten worse since. So I think you had one more point, and I might have lost track of that. Do you have anything to add?
Yeah. So I'm pretty much agree with Ryan. I also think that it's important that folks know that we've had a 0% vacancy rate for a number of years. So when we have a 0% vacancy rate, that means rents are going up year over year at a much higher rate than they would necessarily need to be if we were at a 5% vacancy rate. So we have work to do. I don't think it's our responsibility as electeds or the government to solve everything, but when we make plans for when we do the comprehensive plan, when we talk about infrastructure, when we talk about whether it's water, sewer, electricity, fiber, multimodal, parks, we have to be willing to acknowledge the reality. Because if we don't, then all we're gonna do is start to price out everyone in this room, right? Because folks who can afford to buy a house will keep moving here. And that means we'll get pushed out, or my kids will get pushed out, or my mother-in-law will get pushed out, right? Because that's what happens when we don't accommodate our growth. And I also would push back that, I mean, renters are still a major part of our community. I think that you can rent and still be, participate, volunteer, be a teacher, you know, do a lot of things that are very important. So I don't think that that owning property then makes you a person who's more invested in the community than when you rent. And I think that's, to me, that's kind of a value one.
But some of us pay more taxes than other people.
One more point to maybe one of the last aspects of that. There will never be enough housing. I would push back on that as well. What we have is a shortage of housing, and it's not a Anacortes shortage, it's a regional shortage, which means we need Mount Vernon to do their part, we need Burlington to do their part, we need Snohomish County and King County, we need everybody to do their part to build housing sufficient to meet the demand that we are experiencing. We are also doing work to try to put some constraints on the demand. And one of the elements of constraining demand and at the same time increasing supply has been our prohibition on short-term rentals in residential zones, and now prohibition on short-term rentals in commercial zones. We would like to be able to have short-term rentals, but in a housing crisis, the most important thing we need to achieve is more housing. And this is not really a debatable that we have a housing crisis, and its scale is unprecedented. So we need to provide more housing. And it simply isn't true that there will never be enough housing. If we had more housing, we would have lower prices, and we would have people able to sort themselves into the housing that they need to be in, as Christine has been talking about. Some people would prefer not to be in a single family residence. Some people would prefer to be in a condo. When I bought my house, I would have preferred to buy a condo. Instead, I spent 10 years maintaining the lawn and renovating my 1920s era house. But there were no condos available, and there were no condos downtown. And so a better variety and mix helps us by itself, but also we simply need more supply. John.
Hold on, we have another question over here.
I just wanted to add one thing to that. I'm going to stay in my lane and not challenge anybody, but these numbers that we're seeing up here is the amount of housing that we need to make the whole community that Councilmember Walters was talking about. These are the numbers that we need to make sure that we are in balance with the number of jobs that we have and the number of people in town in these income brackets. So, you might say this is altruistic, but what this is we're trying to accommodate these numbers to make sure that we're addressing the number of needed housing in each of these brackets.
Suzanne Roder, just an anecdote. I checked a couple months ago in the Help Wanted section of the Anacortes America for 2 weeks in a row. And the first week there was one job listed for light housekeeping in Mount Vernon. The following week there was a job in concrete. So I don't know when you say there's lots of jobs here. I didn't see it in the want ads in the paper. And then also I checked stats from the United Nations on the growth rate, population increase in the United States, and it's actually pretty flat, 1.2 people per 100 increase. Death rate is on the rise. So our population is quite stable, so I'm curious where these numbers are coming that we have to accommodate this large, massive increase in our population. I question those statistics. And you used the term land capacity analysis, where you're going to go out and ferret every square inch of space that can be developed. And then once you do that, then you'll go into the urban growth areas. I mean, at what point do you say, this is unsustainable? We don't have the land. Why do we have to ruin what we have for the sake of growth? Yes, of course, it's great to have more housing, but at some point people have to realize they can't always get what they want. And I don't know if it's really our job to make sure that they do. Thank you. last thing, on the vehicle miles traveled, sorry, I'm on a roll. There's I call them stack and packs, and that's what they are, these little things that, 6-unit things that pop up all over town. The one over on 32nd by the roundabout there, if you go by and notice, there are 2 back-to-back stack and packs, and they're so close together that you probably have to do a 20-point turn to get into your into your garage. So I'm thinking that's probably part of your effort to get rid of vehicles and reduce vehicle miles, is to make it so there's no parking for all these houses that you're going to be providing. Thank you.
We use numbers from the United States Census and from the Office of Fiscal Management at the state of Washington. They're the ones who actually provide us the demand forecasts here. And essentially what they are demand forecasts. This is the number of housing units that will be demanded across the board and in each of these income categories. Don't provide supply, and with all due respect to John, I'm a land use attorney. I can figure out how we can write our code so you can't build a house in Anacortes. But if we do that, and you control supply and demand just keeps going up, then prices go up. And that is not sustainable. The urban growth area question is a good one, because I expect that we will get suggestions from property owners who would like to become richer, that we expand the urban growth area and then eventually the city limits to bring their property inside the city. As Christine pointed out, there's not a lot of opportunity to do that, but there's some. The problem is, bring it back to capital facilities. It's another lever, it's another element. If you add land for more development, it increases the cost of building out the sewer, the stormwater, the electrical, which we're not responsible for, fortunately, but somebody is, and providing fire service and police service and all the other services that we expect. Within the city limits, we provide a higher level. We are the regional provider of fire and EMS service, but within the city limits, we provide a higher level of service because we can. If we expand our urban growth area boundary, we will be incurring additional costs for all of those services. So we want to be very hesitant to expand the urban growth area boundary. There aren't a lot of opportunities, and those forest land, the green on the map, is not just forest land, it's protected forest land. So we couldn't build on it if we wanted to. But we've got to look at the fiscal side of it as well.
Andrea Dahl. I'm interested in the overlay on Old Town. And what are the plans for that? Any protections for the Old Town? Just exactly what we're thinking about. And the second question has to do with MGB. And, we're going to see a lot of changes through MGB properties. And we're talking about public participation. So, 2 different questions.
Okay, well, we won't answer the. Okay, 2 questions. We won't answer the question about MJB. You can see Mr. Coleman afterward. Because it is a quasi-judicial matter that will come forward to the City Council for decision. So we're prohibited by statute from talking about it with any level of specificity. So your first question though was about the Old Town overlay. We did away with the Old Town overlay in the 2016 update. Old Town is now its own zone. So it's a little bit simpler in the development regulations to look at. You don't have to look at an overlay and then the underlying zone. The question I think that you're getting at though is what will happen to Old Town? It's my view that we need to protect what we can of the historic nature of Old Town. And Old Town was one of the first zones that had any kind of design regulations, right? That basically was what the Old Town overlay accomplished much prior to 2016, was to put on some design regulations so you don't end up with sort of new development, new housing that doesn't look like it fits the character of the Old Town zone. I do think, though, that there is the possibility for development that contains more units within the Old Town Zone that does comply with the design standards and fits the character. Because as a general matter, every zone within the city should take some gentle increase in density rather than it concentrating in one area. The only area I would try to concentrate in is the downtown and our commercial core, because that's an area that would really benefit from residential development above commercial.
Tons of questions here. Okay, I'll start with everyone.
Drew Hill. I'm fairly new to the community. I've seen in other communities that I've lived that in an effort to increase their housing units, they've allowed ADUs where they didn't before. And unfortunately, a lot of those ADUs are now Airbnb units, and they haven't done what they were supposed to do. What is Anacortes going to do to protect those ADUs from becoming short-term rentals?
Hey, I get the easy question. So thank you. We've actually done quite a bit of work on that. So a year or two ago, we put a moratorium on any short-term rentals in the residential zone. A couple years ago, residential though, and we've outright prohibited all short-term rentals in residential, so R1 through R4. More recently, in the last year, we also prohibited ADUs in a moratorium format. It's been at Planning Commission. I think it's going to come to Council for commercial, marine mixed use, and what other ones? Central Business District. Because our concern is, as we start to see higher density, maybe even bonus height, using that bonus height incentive of 600 square feet or less, that we don't want to see those units quickly be turned into short-term rentals. We had one development happen, 22nd or so, off between commercial and R, of townhomes that ended up being not selling and then turning into short-term rentals, and that was a real concern for us because that really wasn't the intent. And so we are very aware of that, and that's why we've put outright prohibited in residential and have a moratorium. And that'll come to Council, and we've had a lot of pushback from real estate agents and some short-term rental managers and some folks in the community that they would like to see short-term rentals still be an option. Any of the current short-term rentals that had a business license are grandfathered in and are allowed to continue. But we just see that as not really serving our goals when we look at our 2016 comprehensive plan. And as of now, and we'll obviously take comment, doesn't really fit with what our community needs to see moving forward. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, and ADUs. So ADUs are allowed outright in all residential lots. The state passed in mid-2023 a new rule that will allow 2 ADUs per residential lot. There are some details that I think Planning Committee I'm a little worried about is what does that look like? They're still required to have all the setbacks and whatnot. But that is coming down, and I think that has to be adopted within 6 months of our comprehensive plan adoption. Is that correct? So that's another thing that we're going to really have to hash out those details, right? I'm on an acre in R1, putting 2 ADUs would have minimum impact. But when we're in R2, that could be a very different thing. So we're going to have to figure out what that looks like.
Hawkins Allison, I moved here 24 years ago, and I live on Summit Beach, and I'm 3/4 of a mile from Summit Park Road, so I'm in the county. And why did you guys stop there?
Talk into the mic.
Oh, I'm sorry. Wait, I'm
swinging around all.
yeah. like I was saying, I'm from Summit Beach, and why did you guys stop at Summit Park Road? And why did you continue? I know that when I got here, there was a big resistance from the people in the community that they didn't want to go into the city. And now most of them are gone. I would like to see my part of the area be part of the city.
I think likely the reason is because our urban growth area, at one time urban growth area, and now urban growth area and city limits, the city limits being the red dotted line, is all industrial. So we didn't pursue a residential urban growth area or residential expansion in that area. And it's all before my time, so I can't tell you.
Residential, what about not being residential now? Like, you don't need more industrial, we need more residential.
Yeah, however, as a general matter, it's expensive to add on to the city. You know, residential outside the city generally has septic and not sewer. And that works if you're outside the city, but.
Area, so, yeah.
You address short-term rentals, but our city is really suffering from a toxic long-term rental situation. And I'm talking about the export of their housing problems by the Whidbey Island Navy base. I think it's wrong that our rents are $2,000 simply because the Whidbey Island Navy base gives each officer, here's $2,000, find something to rent. And that has set a minimum level of our rent levels. So I do think that as a city, you could make a claim to the Navy and say, we are solving your problems, we want some money for that. And hopefully, or otherwise just close the subject on stage.
So when I'm not a land use attorney, nor am I a planner, so I'm kind of like the fluff person between the two. But not only is it a challenge when it comes to rent, one of the things that was brought forward to me in the last couple months is the fact that their labor and delivery on base was shut down a few years ago. So that has put a major strain on Island Hospital, and we are seeing there are at point times where there is not capacity to have laboring mothers come and use our facility. So they're actually, Island Hospital is having to tell folks if they're coming from the islands or kind of East County that they can't even come and use our hospital. So that's something that it's not just rent, but the effects kind of as folks from the Navy base come up and you know, come here. I get it. If I could afford to come here from the Navy and have kind of more of a stable community, right, and schools, whatnot, I would understand why they come here. And I will say, they also do a lot of good. They're major stakeholders in our community. We've seen a number of folks volunteer and run for office and whatnot. So it's not all bad, but yeah, it's a challenge. And I'm gonna let the land use attorney actually answer the legal version of that.
I don't know what I'm supposed to say. I have not seen any study that validates what you said, but I agree that the story is compelling. Like it makes a lot of sense. And you know, they did an EIS about the growler deployment, and it was all about the noise. And I know that people have trouble with the noise from growlers. I have never received a complaint from my constituents about noise from growlers. All I hear about is housing. And so I think that EIS actually should have taken into account the housing impacts and the capital facilities impacts, the hospital on Whidbey Island too, the lack of hospital facilities in Oak Harbor. Those components are what need to occur when we change our comp plan, when we change our urban growth area. The Navy is somewhat more insulated from those, and so we kind of pay a price. I'll co-sign your letter asking for money, but I don't think that's going to be forthcoming. So we're going to need to work around that and figure out how to solve this problem ourselves.
housing project that we used to have in Anacortes.
Hold on, let's get other folks to have a chance. Okay.
My name's Patty Monday. We moved from out on the other side of the island into town because we wanted to be able to walk to a lot of things. And we were surprised to find out how dangerous being a pedestrian is in this town. And I hope that part of your plan is taking pedestrians into account, because all the I'm all for greater density downtown, and you know, a lot of these are great ideas, but it's not a safe place to walk. So I hope that's part of the plan. I'd be happy to be on some kind of a pedestrian subcommittee or something, because we try to do as much as we can walking, and it's just not very viable right now. So.
Excellent point. Another committee that I'm on is the Public Works Committee, and we actually have spent quite a bit of time talking about parking issues downtown and pedestrian facilities downtown. Of course, you realize we're ostensibly working on a roundabout at 12th and Commercial, and most of us haven't figured out how that actually improves pedestrian connectivity through that intersection, which is supposed to be the objective. So we're very much aware of those needs. The big problem with them is it's so expensive to modify a road. Changing the curbs and gutters, which are usually what the prescription is, to bring the road width down at the intersection with bulb outs for pedestrians, or center islands to allow for pedestrians to have a shorter crossing before they can seek what they call refuge in the middle of the street. Those things are very expensive. So that's the challenge, but I think City Council is very oriented around the problem and trying to figure it out.
And I'm saying one thing, it's expensive, but we also have to figure out how to improve that service as we see growth happen. And I think council's very aware that it's, you know, we can't put that on necessarily the developer who's putting in the triplex or fourplex, but we've got to know that then it's our responsibility to figure out how to improve it as those kind of that denser housing is going in. And yeah, it's hard. You push a stroller around, and I had no idea how much, you know, curb cuts make a difference. So it's a real thing.
So you were asking, is there an opportunity for you to participate in something like that? So every time I grab the mic, it's going to be pointing right back to our comprehensive plan update. So our transportation element is going to address multimodal transportation options. The state has put a higher priority on that. So on multimodal, which means, you know, bike, pedestrian, and other non-car type of transportation. And so keep an eye out for when we're going to be having review of the transportation element, because that should be in there for you to review and comment on. And we absolutely have to have you comment. Yeah. Because we need to hear that perspective, but also the emphasis that we want those things fixed, and we need them because we are trying to be pedestrians downtown. We're trying to go to our shops and restaurants. We need to hear that voice, because the alternative side to it is, well, no, we want to drive faster.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's a balance, right? It's not just walking from your house downtown. It's that we want folks to drive downtown if they're too far away, park, and walk up and down the streets, right? And go to all of the stores instead of just the store they're parked in front of.
Corinne Salcedo. When my husband and I came back here in 2004, Mayor Maxwell and the Anacortes American both said that Anacortes, being on an island, population would not be able to grow beyond 19,000. What happened?
Manhattan is on an island. That frankly never made any sense. Every city in the state that is subject to the Growth Management Act has got an urban growth boundary. So it may appear to only be on paper instead of on a coastline, but every city is constrained that way. So Anacortes is not really special in that way, and all cities have the ability to grow up and not out. And the reason that that is significant is because all cities are being asked to grow up and not out, not just the ones on islands. So for example, Burlington is surrounded by natural resource land, farmland, and outside of its dikes, it's constrained by floodplain. Mount Vernon, similarly, is surrounded by farm and forest land. Cedar Woolley is going gangbusters. They can do whatever they want over there. But so most cities have these constraints, and one of the things that we don't really get into over here is GMA instructs the county and the cities to protect those natural resource lands so they are available to grow food and harvest timber. And so a lot of cities have those constraints, not just the ones on islands. And so we may be more constrained, but we also need to do our part. And the other component here, though, is they've got to do their part. And Mount Vernon has one of the largest urban growth areas. We will be looking to them to make sure that they are fulfilling their projected housing quotas as well. Because if they're not doing it, we're not picking up all the slack.
Rosemary, this is a 25-year plan. Are you going to be able to get enough rental housing in or other kinds of housing in to actually bring down the prices? If you're just dribbling in a few units every year to get up to that number, there's no reason for developers to lower their prices. And how, once you've established for the 1,200 units below, are you going to get developers to not raise their prices? How are you going to keep those prices low enough to make available housing for the workers that we need?
I think that's a very good point and very good question. What I would bring us back to is we're not in charge of the prices. The market drives the prices. And so it's that supply and demand and balancing that enables that price point to be achieved. We don't, I don't think, have a great answer to that because it is so expensive in general to build housing and because it takes so long in general to build housing.
And realistically, I don't think we're going to see housing prices go down unless there's a recession, and then we're going to have other issues going with it. What I think our goal would be, or at least my goal, is that we try to slow appreciation and we continue to allow developers, but also nonprofits, so Housing Authority and the Family Center and Habitat for Humanity would like to do some stuff, that we continue in our efforts to provide those types of permanent affordable housing that is based kind of on a nonprofit platform, right? Because a lot, when we look at those ranges, those 0 to 50%, developers aren't building because the numbers don't work. So we've got to partner with nonprofits and Housing Authority and other options like that to fit them into our community.
Before Candace asks her question, the one other thing that I wanted to mention that we haven't talked about here tonight is that homelessness is a result of housing shortage and pricing. And that is not immediately obvious to people, and it's not obvious how those are necessarily connected, but we have the data, we have the studies. We know that homelessness is a consequence of low availability and accessibility of housing. And we're seeing that. I mean, obviously we're seeing that in Western Washington, but we've seen that in Anacortes too. And so just as an example, there are people that you know or that are in your neighborhood that live on the margin. You know, that maybe they have a house, maybe they don't actually own that house, Maybe they're living in it because their parents lived in it and they died, and we don't even know who those are the people that end up homeless as the prices just keep going up and up and up. The people who live in crowded housing, the people who live in housing that gets redeveloped. Now, some of that we do want to occur. We want some of those land use changes to happen, but also the homelessness is the consequence of that, and that is why we've got to address this problem. Not just for people at 100% AMI. People making $96,000 a year should be able to find a house, and a lot of them can't. But also people at that very low end, people making zero. Not all of them are 25-year-old druggies. Some of them are 65 years old and are not capable of holding down a job. They are disabled. They are simply old, or maybe they are mentally disabled. We have people with all of these problems in our community. The Housing Authority provides housing for some 400 people in our community who fit, some of them fit a lot of those boxes. And some of them have almost no income. But they're members of our community too. I mean, we've had school board members live in Housing Authority buildings, people who contribute to our community. And so we need to make sure that we fully understand what we're talking about, the consequence of not having housing. Candace, go ahead.
Candace Conacher. 2 questions. How the accommodation of refineries when you're talking about the climate change situation, is that sort of divided up amongst all of us around this area?
So that's a good question. How do we count the greenhouse gas emissions of the refineries? I don't know. I mean, do you count the greenhouse gas emissions at the refinery, or do we count it coming from your tailpipe, or do we count it, someplace out there? There's lots of possible ways to count that. But the refineries aren't in the city limits. They're in our urban growth area, so we zone that area, but we don't actually have real control over it.
So the county takes care of that.
John, do you have something to add on that?
So the actual emissions from the plants themselves will be in a greenhouse gas inventory. I think we're still working on determining if that's going to be in our greenhouse gas inventory or if it's going to be in like a regional one. It kind of makes, I have a feeling they're going to tell us we need to do it, and that's going to be a challenge because I don't know if the refineries are going to be wanting to give that information out or not. Now, what's coming out of your tailpipe is accounted for in the vehicle miles traveled information, and that's going to be a much more complex regional cooperation trying to figure out, somebody's coming from Cedar Woolley and going to the base. They drive through Anacortes. Is that counting towards Anacortes vehicle miles traveled? We're working on all these issues, and if it is a very compelling question, so stay tuned and continue to come to meetings and find out.
I have one more question.
I'm sorry.
How do you accommodate the Anacortes School District in the plan if you're trying to increase the population?
Do we know? I know that the school district has capacity. They've had some lowering enrollment numbers. I think the question that I've brought forward, especially when we're talking about the climate component, is right now our school district is, when you enter kindergarten, you choose what elementary school you want to go to. So you can choose, it's not, I think when most of us went to school, you just went to the school that was closest to your house. And now that's not how it's handled. So kids can be on the school bus for over an hour each direction. And that's, to me, that's something that should be looked at, right? Twice a day, all these kids moving around, not going to their closest school, and I'm totally guilty of that, so I understand. But yeah, we're gonna have to incorporate that. And I think a number of us have pretty good relations with school board members and the director and whatnot, so we're in regular talk sessions.
they use our. The school districts traditionally use our, the city's population figures, not just for the city, because they serve outside of the city, so they also have to incorporate areas outside of city limits into their calculations for growth, so that they can plan their capital facilities and use. They have their own metrics that they use based on growth to determine how many students and at what age students, and then they'll use that to determine if they need new schools or if they need new transportation, and they get that number from us. So we, of course, invite them to be a participant in this process, and that helps guide their future growth.
Pardon me. I just wanted to comment on what Candice asked, if I may. By the way, I'm so glad I'm not on the planning commission, folks. You're doing a great job, but what a challenge. Anyway, Candice, just to answer your question, or I'll attempt to. The refineries were obliged to meet the 2009 consent decree by the EPA. These folks, they invested a tremendous amount of money to improve their air quality as well as environmental emissions control. For instance, probably some of you will remember in 2004, 2005, you constantly used to see the flares go up. Today, you can no longer see that. We invested a lot of money in that to take all of these gases, recycle them, make something good out of them, and get them out of the air. And also a number of other issues were, but like you see these water plumes coming out of these big stacks. These are tremendous help for removing all of the catalysts that used to come out of the stacks, so the cracker stacks. So you no longer see that. And my request from the community is, please, let's be very gentle with these refineries, folks. You know, the gas prices, as you know, they're second highest in the nation. We're after California. And if we keep really kicking these folks, I promise you, if they shut down and move out, our gasoline prices that are going to be, you know, tremendous. We will exceed what California is going through. So I'm asking you all to be gentle with these people and see if we can, you know, support them rather than criticize them. Anyway, thank you.
Yeah, you're not gonna see us do anything with the comprehensive plan update that affects the refineries in any significant way. For one, they are legally pre-existing land uses, but also we cannot be responsible for the greenhouse gas emissions of the refineries that happen to be located in Anacortes. So that is not on the agenda. You're not going to see anything substantial in any way that way. What I do think we need to plan for is further redevelopment at the refineries at March's Point, because that is within our zoning. And as they decide, you know, I don't anticipate at any point that industrial activity is going to walk away from March's Point. What will happen over time, and we put policies in our comprehensive plan last time about this, is that their products will evolve. You know, maybe they will be producing a different product, maybe they will be building new things to support that new product. And so I think we do want to have policies in place that support that, so that as things change over time, and we've already seen some of it, that the refineries we're still making industrial use of that property out there. It's still productive, it's still an employment base. It also, the refineries consume about 50% of our water. Now, you know, we could save 50% if they turned it off and quit using that water. But also we have built our financial model for how we run our water system around them buying 50% of our water. So we need to be ahead of those things. We need to plan and try to anticipate as much as we can, try to see around corners and what's going to happen, and then make adjustments. But I don't see us as a forcing agent in any of that. We will be reacting, trying to anticipate, but then reacting.
And the other component is, when we look at the Anacortes School District, that's all of Fidalgo Island, Guaymas Island, and I believe Sinclair. And so when we talk about our property taxes, the refineries are a huge portion of covering the cost of our schools, right? So not only would the city see it with water, but the school district would be greatly affected.
Correct.
All right, folks, I think we're kind of ending, we're heading to just 9 o'clock, and that's when we like to end. So I'm going to cut the questions out. I'm sure there's some great discussions and talks that we can still have. Thank you all for coming, especially to thank John. I think this has been a very interesting and informative meeting. It sounds like you can continue on to talk to these folks at their meetings. You get on the Anacortes website. And really appreciate everybody coming and being so engaged and involved. So thank you. One question, if you have a few minutes, if you can stack up the chairs.
Don't go down that road.